Hello and welcome. My name is Shelton Zia, and I'm here today to give a testimony of the ways that God has shown up in my life. Many people are surprised when they find out that I'm a psychologist and that I believe in God, I believe in Christ. And so I have been feeling led to share my testimony. I remember early on in my journey, I was called to the front to share a testimony about something that had occurred. And I remember sort of fumbling through it. And when I talked to my Christianity coach later on about it, she mentioned and talked about how I was still growing, right? My testimony was still unfolding. And so if you share your testimony prematurely when there's still things that need to be healed, it could actually cause more harm than good. And so that was wisdom that she shared with me, because I remember obviously being very excited and wanting everybody to know about what God has done in my life. But that was the wisdom that I needed to hold back and allow God to continue to heal me, transform me, and renew me until such a time as sharing my testimony would flow authentically and would be guided by the Holy Spirit. And so today I'm just going to talk. I actually don't even have any notes. I'm trusting and believing that the Holy Spirit will guide me through the process. Obviously, I have some idea of how the flow should go, but I have no notes, and I am just going to speak authentically and from the heart. And so I was telling a friend of mine that I would be recording this, and she says, my goodness, how would you even begin? How do you know what to include in your testimony? And I said, well, you would just start from the beginning. And then she's like, well, how far back do you go? And I thought, well, in the beginning, when I was born, I was a child. Right? That's the beginning. The beginning is whatever you recall about the beginning and its relevance to the story. Obviously, I haven't thought through what all the components and how they're going to weave together, but at the same time I do have some sense of what the beginning was for me. And for me, the beginning was growing up in Zimbabwe. So I am the first of 6 siblings, and I was born in Zimbabwe to 2 Zimbabwean parents. And growing up, I don't have that same story that other people have, that I was born in the church and every memory that I have was in the church. But I do recall the moment or the time or the period in which I did start to go to church. I had to be about 4 or 5 years old. And what I remember was my mom taking us to a church. And it was the first time I'd ever had this church experience. And it was like, okay, all right, it's a thing. I'm looking to my mom to see how she's responding and what she's doing. Okay, we're doing this. And before you know it, we stopped going to that church, but we went to another church. Okay. We stopped going to that church. Okay, we're at this new church. Looking at mom. Okay, she's cool. All right, this is what we're doing now. And we stopped going to that church, and then so I remember that my mom definitely had us in a number of different churches for a period and a season. And I remember distinctly one time finally saying to her, why did we stop going to that church? I like that church because they gave us cake after service. Right? That's the thinking of a child. And then obviously my mom, later on shared that she felt like it was not a welcoming and supporting environment. But I remember distinctly having the thought that my mom was looking for something. But I did not have a way to articulate that, and I didn't feel like I could even ask her, right? But I remember distinctly that memory. So that's the beginning of my journey, is being 5 years old, 6 years old, and recalling that mom is taking us from church to church. And even when it seems like, okay, we've been coming here for a while and we seem settled, before you know it, we've switched. And so that instilled something in me. And I want you to hold on to that, put it in your pocket, because we're going to come back to that. And so we spent now several years just going to various different churches. And around the age of 11 or 12, we started going to the church that my dad went to as a kid, called Harare Baptist Church. And so my dad had sort of grown up in that church, and for whatever reason, we ended up at that church. And that would be the church that I ended up going to for my entire teenage years until I left my parents' house. And so I say to people that I grew up Baptist, but I don't often tell that other first part of the story where I recall my mom searching, and it was just my mom and my brother. It was my mom, my brother, and I. My dad was not part of that. It was just us. And then at some point, my dad just took us to this church, and that was the church we began going to. And my parents were very involved in that church, and we participated in all the things, right? So I think folks know about Wednesday night service, Friday night service, Bible studies, small groups, and then Sundays you've got Sunday school, and then you've got main service, and all of these things that, our lives pretty much revolved around church in the same way that most people sort of talk about from those early years and experiences. Now, I recall at some point a church that I attended was in Shona, and the language that I speak in Zimbabwe is called Shona. And that church was in Shona, and they would have somebody interpreting in Chewa because there was folks from Malawi there, a big Malawian population within our church. So it tended to go on for a long time because you were hearing it twice, right? You were hearing the word twice. It would be said in Shona, and then it would be said in Chewa. And so at some point, I asked my parents if I could go to this English speaking church. It's still a black church, but still English speaking. And it was in the city, and that they would drop us off on their way to the other church. And for a few months that worked out, and it was like, okay, this is a thing. It was my brother and I, we would go to that other church. And I remember enjoying that because aside from it being shorter, it was also easier for me to process. Now, Shona is my first language, but I think critically and process information primarily in English. When I hear the word or messages or communication in Shona, it's like there's an extra layer of processing there. Not to speak negatively about that experience or anything. It's just that English is easier for me to process. That's literally all that it is. And so I enjoyed that church. And then one day my dad decided, nope, we all as a family go to this other church. And I remember sort of tilting my head and sort of wondering about that, because I recall that it was okay to find something that works for you. Remember I said growing up, mom was looking for something. And so here I am asking to go to this other church that I felt like was working for me, and then being told no. And so, okay, fine. You can't argue with your parents. And so I end up going to Harare Baptist again. And so forth. And by that time, I think I was entering my teenage rebellious years, and just was like, well, I'm just not going to listen then. You can't make me listen. I don't know why that was the thing to do. But I just remember just disengaging from it and just not really being into it. I mean, we just go to church because that's what we do. And just you kind of brace yourself for being there for hours on end. Which I think is the story for a lot of people as it relates to their church experience in childhood. At some point, I'm going to fast forward because I don't know that anything notable happened. I do remember. So one thing notable that did occur that I do remember about my church experience was when they would preach and say that the second coming of Christ would occur after everybody has heard the word. That Christ wouldn't come back until everybody has had the opportunity to hear the word and to be saved. And I recall at a young age asking, well, how are folks going to get to the remote tribes in the Amazon or Papua New Guinea or whatever? Like, I was that sort of curious. And if you've if you recall, this was in the 90s and the 80s and the 90s, and I wasn't, the internet wasn't a thing then. So this question was a very reasonable question when you consider that the internet and digital communication was not yet a thing. So that question really gnawed at me for a really long time, and it would cause me to question but not get answers. And I had a number of questions similar to that just nobody could ever answer. And that's just the way that I was as a kid. I was a very curious kid, and I had a lot of questions that oftentimes were seen as if I was questioning adults or trying to entrap them or make them look bad or something like that. And so I never got answers to a lot of those questions. So that is another early memory that I feel like is relevant to my journey and where I am now. So fast forward through the years, I graduate high school, and my dad sends me to the US and to attend college. And so I came to America in January 2000 and started my college experience at a small HBCU in East Texas, Wiley College. The great debaters, come on. And so I went to Wiley College. And now this is the first time I'm out of the house, remember? So I don't have to go to church. Who gonna make me go to church? I lived in the dorms. I had some friends and a community of Zimbabwean people that I interacted with. Even if I wanted to go to church, what church was I gonna go to? I don't think that I ever went to church when I lived in Marshall, Texas. I mean, I'd have to think really hard, or if somebody jogged my memory, I might recall. But I didn't go to church when I was in Marshall. And so I was at Wiley for about a year and a half. And at some point I decided to transfer schools, and I ended up transferring to Michigan State. And so I went to Michigan State University. Shout out the Spartans, go Spartans. And I was there for a year. And during that time, I made some friends. Lisa is one of the friends that I made. She was in the same dorm and we lived in the same hall. And she's relevant because she invited me to her church. So this is the first time I've now gone to church because somebody invited me and I chose to, and I said yes. So as an adult, right, this was my first experience of going to church. And remember, when I was a teenager, I preferred to go to church and hear the word in English. And so here I am now in East Lansing, Michigan. My white friend invites me to her church, and it's a pretty international church, they like to call that, because I remember meeting somebody from El Salvador and other places around the world. So I started to go to that church, and people were excited to have me. They would pick me up, and I think that's common, particularly churches that cater to college students, is that they'll pick you up on Sundays, and that basically ensures that you come. And I got involved and got into community and really enjoyed my time there. Now, I was only in Michigan for a year because my parents couldn't pay for my tuition anymore. Things had happened in Zimbabwe. The economy had tanked and they had moved to the UK, et cetera, et cetera. They're like, look, you're on your own, figure it out. And it's like, okay, how do I pay these thousands of dollars in tuition? So I decided to take a semester off so that I could figure things out and make it work. And so during that time, I forgot to mention, I was dating my boyfriend at the time, who I then married and is now my ex-husband. So I was dating a person, and he was like, well, why don't you just come over here while you figure it out? So I go to Texas, Galveston, Texas, to take my semester off. Okay, so it's one semester off in Galveston, Texas. And that one semester off just, turned into 8 years. And so I did not go back to Michigan. I should just, put a bow in that story. I did not go back to Michigan, but it did take me 8 years to go back to school, is the point. And so during this time, I started attending a Methodist church, and I don't recall how we were invited to the Methodist church. But there's a Methodist church. It was the biggest church on the island. We lived in Galveston at the time. It was the biggest church on the island, and just everybody knew Moody Methodist, and the Moody's pretty much owned a lot of things around the island anyway. So somehow I ended up going to that. I don't recall who had invited us. And it's somewhere along the way, I get married, and along the way, we have our kids. But the point that I want to emphasize here is that I was attending a Methodist church. Now, if you know anything about the Methodist church, it is very much about the doctrine of grace, right? And it's a very like whimsical, low-key, chill environment. I liken it to, if you're thinking of intensity of church experience, you know, you've got Catholic here, then you've got Anglican, and you got Methodist, right? It's not that far away from from being prim and proper, but it also, you know, they did so they did was a Protestant church, so they did deviate from Catholicism, but it wasn't a very spirit-filled, and maybe that's the word I should use, spirit-filled church. And I recall sort of feeling like church was a thing that we did, like a cultural experience, but not necessarily an impactful experience. That was my experience up until this time. And so we just went to church to be part of community and to do the things that we did. But I recall having a lot of questions. And so I mentioned that it was Moody Methodist. They owned a lot of things on the island. And so I recall one thing that I struggled with was tithing in that particular church. They had $1 million organ. I remember that. And I remember really struggling to make ends meet. But here we are listening to this $1 million organ, and then y'all are pressing me for my tithe. And I was like, you know what? I am going to tithe and send my money to folks in Zim that I know that need this. That's what my tithe is. Whether that's doctrinal or not, that is how I justified it in my head, was this church that has this endowment from the Moody's and has this $1 million organ and all of these affluent people does not need my little tithe. I'm going to send my money to folks back home. And so those are, again, you know, all of the questions that I've always had that I felt like weren't being answered. And so that was kind of the experience with that church. And we continued to go to that church until we left Galveston Island. And we left Galveston in September 2008. And why I remember that specifically is because we left due to Hurricane Ike. So Hurricane Ike swept through the island and destroyed everything. We lost everything. But at that time, we now had 2 children. My ex-husband's parents lived in Maryland, and so that's how we made it to the DMV. So we evacuated from Texas and moved to Maryland to stay with my in-laws. And at that point, we hadn't even decided that we were going to stay. We were just evacuating. This is where we're at. And so we were staying with them, trying to figure out what we're going to do, waiting to hear about going back onto Galveston Island. And it just didn't look like it was going to happen. And so by the end of the year, my ex-husband had decided to join the military. And it was kind of like a, what? We've been married for 5 years and you just go join the military out of nowhere? Wait a minute. And I recall we had somewhat of a conversation about it, but the main point that we settled on was he felt like that was his dream, and if he didn't do it, he would resent it and regret it for the rest of his life. And so when you hear something like that, who am I to stand in the way of somebody's dreams? And so he did go into the military, and at that point is when I decided, okay, well, I guess I'll go back to school. It was like, all right, I need to do something as well. I was trying to go back to school, and so this now seems as good a time as any. And so this, in January 2009, I enrolled at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And at UMBC, I studied psychology as an undergraduate degree, and then went on to get my master's and my PhD. The academic journey does have some parallels with my Christian journey, but I'm just mentioning it, what that trajectory was like, so that you know how I'm weaving my Christianity, my spiritual journey within that. And so when I started attending UMBC, I did go to church in the local area. There was a Methodist church, an African Methodist Episcopal. No, it was a United Methodist. And those that know Methodist denominational things understand these distinctions. It was United Methodist, but it was African American. And it's differentiated from the AME, Methodist. So it was an African American United Methodist Church, which I loved, and the music and all of that. And I would, feel just hope and inspiration, and really felt welcome, and all of these things that were just amazing. My in-laws attended Catholic church, and they would question us about why we were going to Methodist church instead of going to Catholic church, and all of the things, whatever that means to the Catholic folks. And that did create some friction within the household as it relates to that. But we persisted, nevertheless, attending the Methodist church. And then I got invited to Church of the Redeemer. Everybody in the DMV knows Church of the Redeemer. And I went to Church of the Redeemer a little bit, and, it was okay until it wasn't. And then I went to it. So I now started making my rounds. But I honestly don't think that I had thought about how my mom had done something similar when we were little, right? I'm now doing the same thing with my two kids, making the rounds with those churches. But I didn't realize that I was searching for whatever it is, but I'm now going to different churches. And I should also add that during this time, I had a mentor in college who was mentoring me on my academic journey, and sort of giving me sort of the play-by-play of how to navigate the academic system and processes, applying to grad school, and navigating the politics within the department. But that mentor was influencing more than just my academics. That mentor was also influencing my worldview and how I thought about things. And so there's certainly many things that I got from that mentor that are still a part of my makeup today, and how I view the world and how I move through the world. But unfortunately, one of the things that mentor did was sort of poke holes at my Christianity. Look, I already had questions, right? But I somehow just continued to go despite those questions. But now when your mentor is questioning you about your religion, you almost can't stand a chance, right? Because there's a power differential there. You are holding them in high regard. They are guiding you in where you want to go. So in some ways, anytime they begin questioning something that important or fundamental, their opinion is going to be what takes root. And so that, and I'm not blaming my mentor for this, certainly not, but I'm saying I already had questions. And it wasn't helpful that my mentor started poking more holes in the thing that I was sort of holding together precariously, right? And so by, I don't know what year this was, I would say 2013 or 2014, 2012, I don't know. It's in that time frame, okay? I don't know, because my 20 teens are a blur, because I was in school a lot, and I remember going to school. But that is when I started my deconstruction process. I would say 2012, I started deconstructing Christianity. And we didn't have that term back then. Right? They now call it deconstruction and make it seem all sophisticated and fancy now. But I began my deconstruction journey in 2012. 1, because I already had questions. 2, because I was already searching. And then 3, I had a mentor who was not Christian, who was poking holes in it. So eventually I began my deconstruction process. questioning why I believe what I believe, and looking for evidence, almost asking God to prove to me, and God, shout out to God, doesn't respond to our demands in those ways. And to be honest, I was already on my way out. So I don't even know that that was even a genuine, authentic questioning, right? It was almost like finding evidence not to go to church anymore, right? That's what I did. And at the same time, my marriage was, falling apart, and we were separated, and I was dating a person who, disclosed that they were polyamorous. And so it's like, polyamorous, what does that mean? And I go to research polyamory, and this was again in the 20 teens. The internet wasn't what it is right now, but there was a few blogs here and some articles there and a book, right? By Deborah Anapol. I guess it doesn't matter what the book is, but there was a book written by a clinical psychologist about polyamory. And so I read that book to try to understand polyamory and say, this person I'm dating says he's polyamorous, I guess we polyamorous, right? That's how I integrated myself into that, was to try to understand what it is so that I could do it the right way, whatever that is. In that process too, I found a person, I guess I can say their names because they're famous for that and they're still in it. Kenya Stevens, and her husband, Rakem Sekou, Carl Stevens. And they had a polyamory group on Facebook called Progressive Love. And the group was called Base Camp. And the group had a couple of hundred people in there that were learning about polyamory, trying to establish their polyamory, opening their relationships, etc. Now, mind you, I'm in this relationship with this polyamorous person, but I'm learning these things on my own, right? I'm trying to figure it out, because up until then it was I am polyamorous, and I'm like, okay, well, if we're gonna do polyamory, let me figure it out. So I'm now in this group with all of these people, and I meet some really incredible, dynamic, intelligent people. And it was community. It was a community that I didn't have, that I hadn't had for a really long time. And remember, my marriage was coming to an end. And so this was something to enter and to feel some sense of belonging. Because unfortunately, when my marriage ended, among the Zimbabwean community, it's like everybody took his side. And so I all of a sudden found myself with no community. And so it made sense to enter into that community, or not made sense, but like a confluence of events led me to that community. And so I'm learning about polyamory. I'm taking the classes, I'm going on the calls, I'm doing all of the things, I'm getting to know people and stuff like that. And one of the things that they introduced was West African spirituality, as well as Kemetic spirituality. So not to spend too much time going into detail about that, but West African spirituality has to do with the deities and the orishas and things that are part of the sort of Nigerian pantheon. And then Kemetic is sort of ancient Egyptian spirituality, and then it would integrate some Greek mythology as well. And so at the way that it was introduced to me was that it is a form of spirituality that integrates and helps you integrate this polyamory thing. I did not know that I was entering into New Age spirituality, because they don't tell you that it's New Age spirituality. Doesn't advertise that it's New Age spirituality. And when you enter New Age, you usually enter through one channel, and it seems like you're doing this one thing. But one thing that I learned is that when you start that one thing, it will lead to the other things. It just cascades into everything else. And so that's how I entered into New Age spirituality. And interestingly, I'm now in grad school, And a lot of the coping skills and tools and mechanisms that we use to support people do tend to have a new age feel to it. So there's things such as mindfulness, and mindfulness in and of itself is not necessarily a new age concept, but then they would use meditation and yoga and things like that to help people do their mindfulness, right? And so you can do mindfulness without those things, but again, it just gets conflated. And so now I am not only studying polyamory, I'm now in New Age. I am now just in this no man's land, is what I call it. And the thing about New Age is that it's so vast, right? It's so vast that when you begin with something, it can lead you to another thing, which can lead you to another thing, and on and on. In addition, whatever it is that you're searching for in New Age, if you don't find it with this modality, you'll hear about some other little thing that you'll then try and say, oh, maybe this is the thing. And then you'll hear about another, oh, maybe this is the thing. And remember, I had already grown up searching, right? Believing that searching was okay and that it was fine to do different things until you figured it out. So remember, I had said to hold that thing that I did as a kid that our mom was doing. This is now how it played out for me, so that my searching and meandering through the New Age concepts was almost acceptable. It was almost like I was destined to be that way because I already had grown up with the belief and the understanding that it was okay to search. And so I'm doing this New Age stuff, and I don't even want to get into all of the details. But let me just say that I tried just about everything within the New Age realm. I'll probably make a list that I'll put in the description or the caption of all of the different things that I studied. But I already mentioned some of the things: West African religion, Kemetic religion, Greek mythology, paganism, Wiccan, Buddhism, you name it. Okay, this like that song, a list of all, you name it. All the way to even doing ayahuasca ceremonies. Okay, that when you get to ayahuasca ceremonies within New Age, that's how you know you're really in it, right? And so I went as far as doing ayahuasca twice. And that'll be another video for another time. Right now, I'm just sharing my testimony and my spiritual journey. And so at some point, I took a look at my life, and having been in school for a long time, having had many ups and downs, my marriage has ended, and all of my kids now live with their dad, and just looking at my life and saying, where am I? What am I doing? What is the goal? Have I accomplished anything that I set out to accomplish? And for whatever reason, taking stock of my life at that point made me realize the level of hardship I had experienced in my life. My brother used to call it, what did he call it? He called it spectacularly unlucky. Like unusual. This is like the unlucky that is like so lucky. Only a few of you are this unlucky, where, unlucky in love, unlucky with finances, just a lot of heartache, a lot of mental health challenges, a lot of physical health challenges, and just relationship problems, and just on and on and on. And so I'm now taking stock of my life and saying, what is this? And I'm also saying, and of all of these religions and spirituality and things that I've done, how come none of y'all have been able to resolve any of this? Right? And Christianity at that time was not exempt, because the way that I had done Christianity had not been spirit filled and leading to any lasting change or transformation. And so I started to sort of research, and within the New Age community, you go to a person and get a reading, and you hear all of the different things. Now, I'm not encouraging, and I please do not go and get a reading to find out what's going on in your life, okay? But that's all I had. That's all I had and knew to do at that time. And so these people went down the list and told me all of these things that I've experienced and were accurate. But the thing is, and I now understand it, is that using sort of demonic means to read a person doesn't make it doesn't make them righteous. It doesn't make them that they're being helpful, right? And again, having gotten these readings about what was going on in my life, they then said, these people are causing these things to happen in your life. And so now you're starting to get suspicious and wonder about all of these things. And they're telling you about generational curses that have been passed down and all of these rituals and ceremonies that you need to do to get rid of it. And so, I mean, this was around 2019, 2020, right? As we're going into COVID, I'm now like delving into, okay, what are the generational challenges within my family? What are the patterns of behaviors that have gone through my family that we've experienced that are influencing my life? What are the problems that I've experienced? What are the problems that I've faced? And I'm now doing like a scientific investigation on my bloodline and on the spiritual aspects of it. As luck would have it, or misluck, I don't know how to characterize it, my brother was also going through a similar journey, and he had stumbled upon Zimbabwean spiritual practices called Chivanu. And so, because I'd already been doing New Age things, coming to Chivanu was almost, I got led to it through a South African spiritual person who was doing things that were very similar to Chivanu. And I mean, they are similar because it's the same region. And so that also eventually led me on my own to Zimbabwean spiritual Chivanu. And my brother also on his own had been led by whatever means to also Chivanu. So now the two of us are now doing Chivanu, and it feels like, oh, we're doing this thing together, and there's another person who's teaching you and imparting, and you're sharing information and knowledge. So I go to Zimbabwe, and in Zim culture, there's a concept called kufambira, which means that you're going to search and find out what the cause of your misfortune is. And you would normally, kufambira, you go to a person who practices Chivanu and you get a reading. And then you do the things, the miko, or the processes or the rituals that they tell you to do to get rid of whatever the misfortune is. And so when you are doing kufambira, you also go from person to person to person, right? So you do this and you try the things and see if it works, and you experience a little bit of breakthrough, and then something else happens, and then you hear from someone else that, oh yeah, I did a thing too, and this person really helps. So then now you go to that person and you do those things, and sometimes it helps, and it helps for a little bit, and then and so in 2022, I went back to Zim and was there for 11 months. When I tell you that that was the year that I fambirat all the things, 2021 to 2022, I was there for 11 months. And I did a scientific analysis of Zimbabwean spirituality. At the same time, I was also learning a lot about demonology and the influences of demonic activity upon humanity. So I had gotten this vast understanding of the demonic realm and how those spirits and entities operate. And I would regularly ask, how is it that we are being tormented and tortured by these things with no way out? And I would say, if the Christians knew about this, they would be more effective. If they had a way to address this, they would be more effective. That's what I used to say. In my mind, the demons were winning. In my mind, the dark side was winning because I've done everything. I done walked, I done gone everywhere, and nothing is working. So what really is anything? And remember, I told you that also, having been on my searching journey, and that one thing leads to another, I've likened it to being in the back rooms. I tell people the concept of the back rooms, it's like trying to get to God through the back door. And you've gone through this door and that door and that door and that door. Now you're so far deep in it, you don't even know how to come back out. You're just there and you're like, which door did I come through? Like you're trying to backtrack to make your way out. You cannot, you're now in it. That's how people get trapped. And that's why I was explaining to folks what that journey was like and how one thing led to another. And so now I'm way deep. I'm now deep in it and I'm trapped. And I'm seeing that none of this is working. And I feel like y'all are just taking resources, taking money, taking my attention and my energy, but for nothing. It's not working. And in 2023, I was in Florida for that year. And I said, I'm going to do nothing. I'm not going to read nothing. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm not even going to engage anything. I believe nothing. and I don't mean it because I've never stopped believing in God, but none of y'all systems are it. Don't come to me with nothing. Don't invite me to nothing. Don't offer me nothing because y'all things don't work is how I felt. And I also happened to be in my internship year, which was very grueling and very demanding. And I also had to work a second job. So I really didn't have time to meander into searching for things. And to be honest, I feel like it was like a break. It was a break from this like 10-year journey of searching and doing all of the things and going down deeper and deeper and deeper into rabbit holes. And so 2023 comes to an end. I finished my internship and I moved to Virginia in 2024 because that's where my kids were living. Since my ex-husband and I got a divorce, they moved with him here in Virginia. And so I moved to Virginia to be nearer to my kids, and I start my postdoctoral fellowship. And this was the first time that life had kind of mellowed out. I'm making a little bit of money. I live in a nice apartment. I live super close to my job. There's this beautiful lake, path where I walk to go to work. It's less than a mile away. I get my steps in. I get fresh air. It's trees. It's just peaceful, right? And it's quiet and I'm not busy. I can now take stock of where I'm at in my life. And I recall walking from work one day and having a conversation with God. Now, mind you, my conversations with God never stopped. I was always talking to God, albeit just all over the place, right? Never still enough to hear him. But I was talking to God and I was saying, God, I'm here and I finally made it. I'm now a doctor and life is finally turning around. But it still feels like a struggle. I feel this deep and profound sense of sadness. What is this? I said, the demonic activity around me has been unrelenting. And whatever entities and spiritual things I've been fighting against have never let up. It feels unfair, God. It feels like I am fighting blindfolded with my hands behind my back. What is that? Is literally the way I'm saying it right now is how I was saying it to God. What is that? It feels unfair, God. What I'm going through is unfair. Either you reduce their power or you increase my power. Oh boy. I literally said that. I feel like I am fighting a losing battle that is unfairly balanced. I am missing something here. In order for me to continue fighting, either you reduce their power or you increase my power. That was around May 2024. I didn't know that that was the prayer that would turn my life around in its totality. Because I feel like I had finally surrendered and I had stopped trying to figure it out on my own. And I'm really earnestly asking God to intervene. Because I had said now, I've tried every which way. There's no other way that this can go unless you get in on this. And so in May or June, I get this email from Rael. And she used to be in the New Age community. And interestingly enough, when I had disconnected from all things New Age, I had deleted people, I had cut off people, unfollowed people. Like, you couldn't tell me. No one had, unless they were following me, but I was no longer following anyone. And so Rael is one person that I still followed for, I don't know what reason it was. She probably because she's highly intelligent, and I felt like I could relate to her level of intelligence and the way that she communicated and expressed things. So she sends out a newsletter. Rael hasn't sent out a newsletter in months, okay? So I see this newsletter, and it's about dreams and figuring out your dreams. And at this point, I hadn't had a dream for years, okay? I mean, I'd be having dreams, but as soon as I wake up, poof, gone, okay? If God's trying to talk to me through a dream, I ain't heard it. And so she's saying this thing about dreams. Come on in and do this seminar to learn about dreams and things like that. Join my Patreon. So I joined Rael's Patreon, and I attend the classes. So it's like a series of classes every week, or I don't know, however many days that she was teaching about dreams. And one of the things she said was, in order to, if you're, experiencing oppression or not remembering your dreams or blah, 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 you probably have some spiritual oppression going on, and that you overcome it through fasting and prayer. I said, fasting? Hello. Fasting. That's the one thing I haven't really earnestly done, is fasting. And I had been feeling a call to fasting, just from a biological health standpoint. And so I was already primed for that message. I really, truly was. And when she said that, I said, you ain't say nothing but a word. We're on it. Okay, we gonna fast.